Wise Child by Monica Furlong, Chapter 3, The Herb Garden. Do you really have a broomstick? I asked Juniper. Of course, over there behind the door. How else would I sweep the floor? This morning the big room was quiet and peaceful. Juniper was busy putting wood into her bread oven. 3 loaves had already been set to rise on the table. She was singing as she worked. Seeing her flushed and busy, and the house so pleasant and normal, it was hard to believe that only last night I had felt myself in danger. The sun shone upon the scrubbed table. The fire had gone out, leaving a pile of ashes on the hearth. Ruby and Pearl were nowhere to be seen. Before coming downstairs, I had looked at myself in Juniper's big bronze mirror, decorated with scrolls and tendrils, and as if looking at myself once had created a habit, my eyes now went automatically to the round mirror over the fireplace. When I looked in this mirror, however, I did not see my pale face, swollen eyelids, and spiky hair reflected. Instead, I could see the village street quite clearly, with old Donal limping in his bandy way down the middle of it. 2 of the women talking at a doorstep, and another sweeping out her house. I exclaimed with astonishment. Juniper, who was pouring creamy yellow milk out of a big jug, looked up with interest. "What can you see?" she asked curiously. "Donal and Margaret," I said shortly. The sight of the milk had made me aware that I was, once again, extremely hungry. It was wonderful that there was plenty of oatmeal and bread and honey. Soon my stomach felt round and full. "Why does that mirror show the village?" I asked Juniper. It's a magic mirror," she said matter-of-factly. "After breakfast," she went on, "you must have a look at Daisy and the rest of the garden. Then we'd better do some lessons." "In magic?" I asked. I was both curious and scared. Juniper laughed. "I thought we'd begin with reading, writing, astronomy, fairy stories, that kind of thing. Later on we'll do a bit of Latin." "Girls don't learn Latin," I told her. "It unfits them for marriage." I was quoting my Uncle Gregor's views on the education of girls. "And I never heard of a school that taught fairy tales." "All learned people learn Latin," she said. "It's bound to come in useful. Fairy tales, on the other hand, are about real life." I could not make head or tail of this, so I changed the subject slightly. "Will you beat me?" I asked with interest. "What do you think?" "I think you will. All teachers beat children to make them behave." "Will you be disappointed if I don't?" I thought this over. It was a difficult point. "I don't like anything that hurts," I said finally. "On the other hand, I don't want to be a spoiled child. More than I am already, that is." "Are you spoiled, wise child?" "My cousins always said so, and Bridget from the Beyond, if you noticed at the after Mass the other day." "It's not how I see you, at all." After breakfast, Juniper began to wash up the dishes, and she asked me to sweep the floor. I fetched the broomstick to humor her, but I thought I'd better have the housework problem out with her right away. "I don't like cleaning or dusting or cooking or doing dishes or any of those things," I explained to her, "and I don't usually do it. I find it boring, you see." "Everyone has to do those things," she said. "Rich people don't," I pointed out. Juniper laughed, as she often did at things I said in those early days, but at once became quite serious. "They miss a lot of fun," she said, "but quite apart from that, keeping yourself clean, preparing the food you are going to eat, clearing it away afterward, That's what life's about, wise child. When people forget that or lose touch with it, then they lose touch with other important things as well. Men don't do those things. Exactly. Also, as you clean the house up, it gives you time to tidy yourself up inside. You'll see. I was surprised to find that I quite liked sweeping the floor. Partly it was that I wanted to get a good look at the broomstick. I folded the 2 smaller carpets and laid them on the flight of steps outside the front door, and then, since Juniper had disappeared into the dairy, I took a careful look at the broom. It had a straight gray branch for a handle and a bundle of twigs exactly like my grandmother's broom. There wasn't much dust around, but I swept what there was down the cracks between the flags and put all the carpets carefully back into place. Then I started dusting, though there were so many interesting things to clean that I did not seem to make very much progress. Apart from the lute and the harp, which I could not resist twanging, and the cards, which I kept well away from, there was a sort of stone, purple with a network of crystals at its heart. There was a big bowl of sweet-smelling herbs that gave the room a lovely scent that I had noted the night before. There were tiny vases made out of silver, crystal, and what looked like pearl. There was a huge piece of jet. There was a tube with a tiny hole in the top of it, and when you looked through it, you saw a pattern in bright colors that spread and changed. Juniper seemed gratifyingly pleased with my labors when she returned. "You see, you do it beautifully," she said. I preened myself. We passed out of the back door into a little red-tiled courtyard, with Tilly's stable on one side and beyond it a big room which Juniper used for drying herbs. Some branches of the plant we call queen's feather were spread out thinly on the floor, giving the room a scent like new-mown hay. On the other side of the yard was a small barn that housed a dozen hens, a lot of hay, and Daisy, a small red and white cow. Only later, when Juniper taught me to milk her, did I discover that Daisy could be cross and obstinate, just like a person, shoving you when you least expected it, or kicking the pail over. Beyond the courtyard was the herb garden, separated from the meadow by a hedge, and now suddenly I understood the plan of Juniper's garden. She had about a hide of land, and it made a circle or wheel with her house at the center. The herbs were in neat sections of the wheel, fenced in by little hedges of their own. In the inner sections of the wheel were the smaller herbs and the ones Juniper used the most often: eyebright, pennyroyal, primrose, violet, chamomile, heartsease, and marjoram, brought back from distant travels like a number of Juniper's plants. Then there were bigger plants: lovage, feverfew, woodruff, tansy, borage, iris, lily, foxglove, marigold, comfrey, vervain, hyssop, rosemary and wormwood, lavender and southernwood. I did not know the names of most of these plants at the time, and I may be making up some of them, but these were the sorts of plants we usually worked with. Beyond these, on the outer rim of the wheel, were some ragged plants that the eye passed quickly over: nightshade, henbane, thornapple, white poppy, mandrake. They were dusty and unappealing. "Better leave them alone," said Juniper. "They can make you dreadfully ill." "Why have them then?" I asked curiously. "They have their uses. Everything has its time and place." The herb garden was quite unlike the flower garden at the front of the house, where plants grew thickly planted in beautiful wildness. The herbs were neat, businesslike, pretty in their own way, but it was clear that Juniper grew them for quite another purpose. At that first glimpse, I had no idea what a labor those herbs would come to be to me. The hours I would spend cutting, removing seeds, shredding roots, turning and drying, crushing seeds in a mortar, steeping, boiling, infusing, bruising, distilling, making ointments and essences, tinctures and teas. How I was to sweat and ache, weep and grumble over them. As it was, I gave them a brief glance before we went inside to start lessons. First, Juniper had me read to her, and I could see she was impressed. "You're a wonderful reader, wise child," she said. Then she handed me a wax tablet in a bone frame, and I wrote slanty writing on it with a silver stylus. I wrote my name and the names of some saints. It was not very good, but Juniper said, "The stylus is a present to remember your first day as a scholar." Then we did sums, which I liked. After that, she taught me a little English. "English," I said scornfully, like all my countrymen, of our neighbors. "You never know when it will come in useful," she said. I could see that my education was going to be an unusual one. "Better than spinning and weaving," I remarked. "Oh, you'll learn those too." I groaned. "That's what girls do. I hate doing what girls do." "Here, you will never learn anything just because girls do it. But it's a pity not to do things just because girls do them. Work must be done for its own sake." She paused. "What is difficult about learning, any kind of learning, is that you have to give up what you know already to make room for new ideas. Until you get used to it, it makes you feel very silly. But then the reward is that you can suddenly do new things. Children are much better at it than grown-ups, especially if no one beats them." "I don't understand," I said crossly. She ended by teaching me a long poem all about storms and clouds and rainbows and the moon. She made me repeat it to her while she got on with preparing our lunch. After lunch, when I was feeling comfortably full again, full, twice in one day, too, and a bit drowsy, we went back to the herb garden, and at Juniper's suggestion I started collecting the seeds of the black mustard in a basket, while Juniper began picking leaves from the wormwood. "Early afternoon is a good time to collect herbs," Juniper explained. "The dew has long since dried off them." As I collected the awl-shaped seeds, Juniper began to tell me about the sorts of plants you use to make sick people well. Of course, everyone knows some things about making sick people well. They know that you rub goose grease on your chest to prevent a cough in the winter, that eel skins are good for rheumatism, that roast mouse sends away whooping cough, that if you shake hands with Mucky Peg it makes your warts go, that the water in which the blacksmith dips the red-hot horseshoe cures all sorts of things, especially measles, that sort of thing. And what mattered in all of these cures was saying the right words as you took the stuff. If you didn't get the words exactly right, and you often didn't, then you were stuck with your complaint. My people were great ones for reciting little rhymes whenever they did anything, when they were putting on their clothes, going on a journey, s'moring the fire before they retired, or whatever it was. Juniper's ideas were not like that at all. What the plant looked like, she said, whether it resembled the color of the disease, or had been the tree that sheltered Mary, or on which Judas had hung himself, did not come into it, nor did the words you said over the mixture. 2 kinds of things made you better, according to Juniper. One was when something good was going on in your mind. The other was the juices and oils of some of the plants. Through chopping or shredding or crushing or steeping bits of the herbs, usually in the pure water of Juniper's well, you made a mixture, always the same sort of mixture from the same sorts of plants, that made some bit of you feel better. It could be your eyes or your stomach, your skin or your bladder, any part of you really. It's just a matter of learning what plants or what mixtures of plants encourage people to feel well. Don't they want to feel well? I asked in surprise. Not always. Sometimes life is too difficult to be lived, so it's better to be sick for a bit. So what happens then? You have to tease out the pain, in their minds, that is, like teasing burrs out of wool. There were other things you did about pain, she explained to me. Willow bark, if you boiled it, was very good for painful rheumatics and fever. Then there were other plants that made people go to sleep until their bodies had begun to get better. One day I'll teach you all those things, wise child, when you're bigger. In the middle of this explanation, we moved indoors, and I began pounding the seeds until my arms ached and the sweat was running into my eyes. I don't like doing this much, I told Juniper. I think plants are boring anyway. Hard luck, wise child, she replied, but quite soon she suggested that it was time to stop for the day. We took cushions and sat out on the front steps. It was wonderful out there in the afternoon sun. You could see for miles. The steps were so wide across that I could lie full length on them, and so broad that they comfortably supported my whole body. It was lovely to be held in their warmth. I could hear Juniper humming quietly to herself as she sat beside me. She sat stiller than anyone I had ever known. And then I drifted to sleep and dreamed of a boat far away from the island, with a man at the tiller whose face I could not see. Yet I knew it was Finbar, my father. Juniper's sudden exclamation woke me, and there, coming nervously through the yew hedge down below, looking very small at the bottom of the steps, was Coleman. As, wearily and doggedly, he began to climb the steps, he spotted me at the top of the flight, and a brief smile passed over his face. When he drew near, I could see that he had tumbled over on his journey, and that both his knees were cut and bleeding. His bare feet, too, were cut and scratched. His face and his smock were covered with white dust, and there were 2 telltale runnels in the dust on his cheeks. For a moment I felt shy at seeing him there, and then all at once I was delighted and flew down the steps and put my arms around him. Juniper had stood up, and she looked down at us with a friendly smile. "This is Coleman," I said, shouting as I often did when I was excited. "I know," said Juniper. "That was a weary climb. Sit down and rest, and talk to Wise Child, and I'll bring you a drink and some water to wash with." Coleman and I sat and looked at each other, he smiling a tired, uncertain smile, I grinning broadly. "Are you all right?" he whispered so that Juniper could not hear. I nodded. Juniper came back with a bowl of milk, which Coleman drank greedily. Then she brought out a basin of water and a cloth, dipped the cloth in the water, and, squeezing it out, handed it to Coleman so that he could wash his hands and face. Meanwhile, crouching on the steps, she gently bathed his poor knees and feet. "I'm going to learn Latin," I told Coleman proudly while this was going on. "Girls don't, ouch! It unfits them for, ooh!" "It is sore, isn't it?" said Juniper sympathetically. "All learned people learn Latin. She's going to teach me about herbs, too, though that's pretty boring." Juniper giggled but said nothing. "We haven't done any magic yet," I went on. When Juniper had finished washing Coleman's feet, she took a handful of leaves and pressed them gently on the cuts. "I'd sit like that for a bit if I were you," she said, and went off and left us, Coleman clutching the leaves to his wounds. "Did Aunt Morag send you?" I asked with curiosity. "No, she doesn't know I'm here. I wanted to find out how you were." I remembered how all my cousins had thought Juniper was a dangerous witch. I had thought so myself, and even now. I realized what a very brave person Coleman was. "She might have cast a spell on you," I said. "Is it scary?" he asked. "She's nice." I could not quite bring myself to admit yet that it was great fun living with Juniper, and that I felt as if I had known her all my life. "What about the jewels?" Coleman wanted to know. "No sign of those," I whispered. "There's an attic that I haven't been into yet. There are 2 huge cats called Ruby and Pearl. You'll see them probably. And a broomstick, though so far she's only used it to sweep the floor. Well, I swept it actually. Also, the food is lovely." The excited look faded out of Coleman's eyes, and a wistful expression took its place. "What sort of food?" he asked, and I noticed suddenly how thin he was, even though it was summer, the time when food was easiest to get. "Milk and stuff," I said carelessly. "Do you want to come and see the house?" Juniper had disappeared back into her garden, so we were free to wander. I showed him the wonderful carpet, with the strange beasts on it, the stones and ornaments, the lute and the harp. I pointed out the mirror over the fireplace. "It's magic," I told him. He brushed his hair back with his hand. "What do you see?" I asked. "Myself, of course. All mirrors work like that. Nothing magic about that." For the first time in my life with Juniper, the first of many times, I learned that to think something is not necessarily to say it. To have such a secret all of my own made me feel proud, but also a little scared. Coleman loved the carving of the staircase and touched the silken curtains with a kind of awe. I showed him Juniper's bedroom, the spare bedroom, and the little flight of stairs with the white ivory-handled door at the top that led into the attic. When we had done all that, we came down to find that Juniper was taking a pot of stew from the fire. Soon a delicious supper was on the table. Coleman, who only 5 minutes before had been questioning me anxiously about the honey drink, hesitated only a moment. When he saw me pick up my spoon and a piece of bread, he too started to eat, with the absolute concentration and rapture with which my cousins always ate, as if there was nothing in the world but food. There was some of Juniper's creamy cheese to follow, and and Coleman ate a lot of that too. His eyes shone, and his cheeks were as pink as foxgloves. Eventually, we went out into the yard to hunt eggs, and by then Coleman felt almost too full to walk. We knew that there should be about 12 eggs, some of them in predictable places where the hens always laid, others much harder to find. Coleman climbed the ladder into the hayloft, and there were 3 eggs up there. Another was in the stable, just where Tilly might step on it. Hens are so silly, I grumbled. Girls are silly too, said Coleman, so I hit him, and we rolled over and over on the ground, fighting and laughing as we had often done before. As we fell apart, still laughing, I noticed something extraordinary and pointed. Look, Coleman, your legs! Over his knees, where the deep cuts had been, was clean brown skin without a hint of a scar. It was uncanny, and we looked at each other with wide eyes. Maybe it's the devil, said Coleman. We went on looking for eggs, but our bird-like chatter had stopped. Perhaps because I was frightened over what had happened, and was not looking where I was going, I tripped against a rain barrel in the yard and dropped 3 eggs. Coleman looked at me sympathetically. When we got indoors again, Juniper had arranged a small basket for Coleman, with some of her own butter and cheese wrapped in grass to keep it cool, a loaf of bread, and sticks of sugared angelica. It shouldn't be too heavy walking downhill, she said apologetically. I could feel Coleman hesitating at the thought of taking anything with him from this enchanted house, and then see how his mind changed as he thought of all those hungry brothers and sisters at home, how they would crowd around him, eating and talking, eager for all the details of Juniper's house and my new life. I walked with him to the yew hedge, suddenly feeling very homesick, as I watched his small figure walk jerkily down the steps, his basket bobbing beside him until he was out of sight. As if she had known how I would feel, Juniper was sitting waiting for me at the top of the steps. For the first of many times I sat down in her lap, leaning back against her as if it was quite natural to do so. He's brave, isn't he? She said. He doesn't think he is. He gets much more frightened than his brothers. A companionable silence fell between us. There was a luminous, greeny-blue sky over the wide view ahead of us. I felt quite unexpectedly happy. I hadn't cried once all day. How did you do that thing with his legs and the leaves? I asked her. It was a miracle. Not really, she said. Well, no more than anything else. Wounds heal up, don't they? And the scar goes away? Coleman's knees would have been better in a few days anyway. That's the real miracle. I just hurried it up a bit. How do you do it? Difficult to say. I just kind of concentrate. Could I do it? Anyone could do it if they really wanted to. Most people don't want to. I do, I said, thinking what fun it would be to work miracles. There's a price to be paid for it, of course, she said. Well, there is for everything. It's hard work in a way, too. Do you mean you wish you hadn't... Gosh, I'm having trouble. Do you mean you wish you didn't do it then? I'd rather do it than anything in the world. We sat on quietly for a bit, and then I said, I had a dream about Finbar today. I was aware of a sudden alertness in Juniper. Tell me. He was at the helm of a ship, but his back was turned to me. I could not see his face. Why doesn't he come back and take care of me? The voyage has taken hold of him. Voyages do that. He'll be back one day, but maybe not for a while. Meanwhile, you've got me to look after you, which is lucky for both of us. Leaning back against Juniper's strong, warm body, I felt at peace in a way I had not done since Finbar's big arms had last been around me. "Are you going to beat me for breaking the eggs?" I asked her sleepily. "Yes, I expect so," said Juniper, and laughed. I could feel the laugh erupting like a little volcano from right down inside her, and then I began to laugh too, and rolled about on Juniper laughing. Tears of laughter came out of my eyes until I had to wipe them away. "My mother used to beat me," I said. Then she went away, maybe because I was so naughty. That wasn't the reason, wise child. It was comforting to hear her say that, and I did not wonder how she knew. "Well, why don't you beat me then?" I was genuinely puzzled. "I can't be bothered," she said. "That's no way to bring up a child," I said primly, copying the voices of the village women I knew, and because Juniper began to laugh again, I laughed myself. "You'll just have to behave yourself, wise child," Juniper said, "or not, as the case may be. I shall never beat you, whatever you do." "You're a very strange person," I said, "and you've no idea how to bring up children." "I've got you to teach me," she said.